Arab fighter in Fallujah, reading the Quran, his holy book, waiting for the fighting to begin.
We've got to think about epistemology, the way we know things.
Not far away, Marines praying and reading from the Bible, their holy book, waiting for the fighting to begin.
We've got to think about epistemology, the way we know things, how we know things.
A journalist said he heard the ancient text read aloud, "Victory belongs to the Lord." But which one?
The way we know things, how we know things.
Dear friends and relatives, the ceremony we're about to do here is for our Mother Earth and our Father Heaven. That one day everything be good, that we may have a good life for the generation coming up. And I thank you very much to be here. Appreciate this very much. I'm talking my language. Give it thanks. Oh, now all man, what are we dying? See them on, you two men down in our folk, you die right. Nó chơi là chế u là vào một cô thứ lâm ba ba mà chơi là na trời dòng lên con thế đó mình còn kho bay là vào thôi nói đó là vào như là tôi qua hết anh cô hết kho mình từ na chơi u là vào
Good. Hello. I'm Anonymous, back again with another edition of It's All in Your Head on Over the Edge. It's Part 6 tonight. Welcome, intelligent beings, and thank you for listening to radio that will not lie to you. Yes, all up and down the frequencies you can hear God referred to as if he existed. Dutiful lip service is paid everywhere to God, our cultural glue. As if there were no doubt. You will never hear a commercial station suggesting there is no God. Telling the truth is just not right for capitalism. Too many offended customers. But we're different here. We're only selling the truth. We gather together here every week to confirm your independent suspicions that there is no God. That truth is more useful than lies or self-deception, no matter what it is that happens to be true. And that there is no God, in whose convenient assumption all these earthly lies are spread. We, at It's All in Your Head, think these beliefs do more harm than good by keeping us stupid, divided, and not responsible for what happens here. O Lord, if this is true, what will become of us? Nothing, or something. But wherever we're going, it's entirely up to us and our own heads, within which it all is.
Was a loneliness that brought you here, broken and weak? Was it time?
us have faith.
Was the earth standing around?
Let us have faith. Let us have faith. Let us have faith. Let us have faith. Let us have faith.
The Buddhists, the Dalai Lama has said Jesus is a bodhisattva, a great spiritual giant, and Hindus have said the same thing, or similar things about Jesus, that Jesus was essentially a Hindu divinity who came and incarnated on earth. And you can find Hindu temples in the United States that on Christmas Eve will have services devoted to Jesus.
You know about the doctrine of the virgin birth.
Yes, I do.
That means that Mary conceived independently of any male traditional instrumentality. How many non-Christians believe in the virgin birth?
You're really quizzing me today, aren't you?
This is all in your book.
It's about half. It's about half. That's right.
What do you make of that? Non-Christians, half of them believe in the virgin birth.
Well, what I make of it is that a lot of non-Christians are more orthodox theologically than a lot of liberal Christians are. And I think that's very interesting. If you go look at Hindus, they're going to say things that are going to be much more orthodox about Jesus in many respects than Unitarians will. If you walk into an ordinary Unitarian church, or for that matter, a liberal Congregationalist church.
Jesus' image is adaptable.
You speak in your book about the Dr. Rogers, not Dr. Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers. That's
Mr.
right.
Rogers, Jesus. The humanitarian Jesus.
Mr. Rogers. That's
Mr.
right.
Rogers, Jesus.
50 years later, the Emperor Diocletian made one last attempt to wipe out the Christians. He targeted those who held public office, but the persecution failed partly because Christian institutions were now so entrenched in Roman society.
Christians wanted to have their members knowledgeable and capable of reading the Bible. So we find that a large number of people in imperial administration are Christians because they could read and write, which constituted a big problem is the persecution of the Christians, because they were thrown out of their office first when the persecution began, and suddenly the government didn't work anymore.
By that time, the Christians are so numerous that they can't possibly be eradicated. They've already grown that much. So in a sense, the persecution really doesn't catch up until it's already too late.
By now, the Jesus movement had spread its message to every corner of the Roman Empire.
The last decades of the 3rd century, you get a great insurge of people into Christianity. There's some scholars who think that in Egypt, for example, by the 320s, there would actually be a majority of Christians, maybe a rather slight majority, but nonetheless a sizable number of Christians.
The turning point in the history of the Christian movement occurred in the first decades of the 4th century. It was a transformation filled with ironies. It was brought about by a Roman general who worshipped not Jesus, but Apollo, the god of the sun.
Gentle Jesus.
Mr. Rogers. That's
Mr.
right.
Rogers, Jesus. The humanitarian Jesus. The gentle Jesus. Is that right?
That's right.
And that you see that as a reaction to the Calvinism, which was cold and preached predestination, which in itself is an unpleasant expectation to demand of anyone. Namely, that if you are predestined, why even try? It was a reaction to a wrathful God. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Early on in the American Republic, there was an effort to move away from this God-fearing religion to Jesus-loving religion. More of an emphasis on Jesus, less of an emphasis on God the Father. And the way that moved in evangelicalism, which was the dominant form of Christianity in the 19th century, was toward what a friend we have in Jesus. Hymns like that, seeing Jesus as walking with you, talking with you, holding your hand.
The sweet Jesus.
The sweet Jesus, that's right.
Did the sweet Jesus further degenerate into the effeminate Jesus? Meaning more womanly than man?
Well,
the hair, the look?
Yes, it depends on your perspective whether that's a degeneration or an improvement. But certainly Jesus was feminized over the course of the 19th century.
Do you regard feminization of Jesus as anything else but a distortion?
Well, I don't really know exactly what Jesus was like.
Well, that produced a reaction to that. And then we had the manly Jesus, did we not?
Yes, we did.
Was that in the era of Teddy Roosevelt and his lament over civilization of men and that famous speech he gave?
That's right, on the strenuous life. In that period, right at the end of the 19th century, turning into the 20th, as Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders are going up San Juan Hill and we're pursuing the Spanish-American War, there's an effort to buff Jesus up, essentially, to emphasize his scenes where, say, he kicks the money changers out of the temple, or where he's a carpenter and he's buff and he's got strong muscles. That sort of thing. And that was an effort to bring men back into the churches. There were very few men in the churches at that time, and there was an effort to attract them.
One of the most surprising Christian heroes in the entire tradition, I think, is Constantine. He is, first of all, a successful general. He is also the son of a successful general and at the head of the army of the West, and he's fighting another successful general, struggling for who is going to be at the top of the heap of the very higher echelons of Roman government. What happens is that Constantine has a vision.
In the dream, a cross appears on the sun, sun was very important to Constantine anyway. He had a thing about Helios and very often represented himself with a sun god. But the intrusion of the cross was something new. And below this vision was an inscription, were the words, "By this conquer, in tuto Nike."
Let us have faith. That might makes right.
There, and once more, please.
Let us have might. That's right might. That might make faith right.
It has been plausibly argued that what Constantine the Great saw in the sky was an actual physical phenomenon. As a cold front was passing through the area, a ice crystal formed halo appeared around the sun, and this was accompanied by a vertical pillar extending from the sun and horizontal streets with rainbows on them, sometimes called sundogs, and this created a large cross-like form with a halo around the sun, a striking spectacle which certainly with a religious embellishment can really jazz somebody. A vision in the heavens.
We won't try to summarize the various permutations of the image of Jesus in your book. But one of the funnier aspects of it is your portrayal or your backgrounding of the laughing Jesus. Correct?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, I think this is where the friendly Mr. Rogers Jesus sort of ends up, is the Jesus who laughs.
Who produced the laughing Jesus?
Well, there was a couple efforts to do it. There was a fellow called Hubert Eaton at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Southern California. And he went out and tried to find images of Jesus smiling, because he thought that, in America at least, Jesus should smile instead of
smiling is one thing, laughing is another.
Well,
is that your burlesque?
No, it isn't my burlesque. There's actually a picture by an artist named Ralph Kozak that shows Jesus leaning back and not just laughing, really guffawing. And it's
You
quite
mean a
popular.
real knee slap?
It's a real knee slapper, that's right.
Do you find that gained any acceptance in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, that picture is fairly popular in
I don't mean the
evangelical
picture.
circles.
I mean the phenomenon, the reality, the potential reality. We know that Jesus was all human. We know that he was all God because he has a divine nature. When I say we know, this is the Christian theology. At least it's Catholic theology, and it's, I think, still you have a few Orthodox Episcopalians. You're an Episcopalian,
sure, yeah,
who believe in the divine origin, but there's a dual nature. There's the God nature and there's the man nature, but both are fully fulfilled. If you're a fully fulfilled human being, you can sense incongruity and laugh. Correct?
Of course, that's
but it
right.
does, when this is mentioned to people, it seems like a gross and inappropriate distortion. Does it not?
Well, it does, because people think religion's supposed to be serious.
And he interpreted this dream to mean that by this symbol of the cross, he could defeat his arch enemy at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and become sole emperor. And so he had so the story goes, he had his soldiers paint the cross on their shields. Constantine won the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, became the sole emperor of the Roman Empire, and then, in a dramatic shift of geopolitics, relocates the center of Roman rule from the eternal city Rome to a new city, Constantinople.
And one more try, please.
Let us have right faith that makes faith right.
At a certain point, I began to do Buddhist meditation because Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. And ironically, by just sitting, trying to keep an empty mind on my cushion, I found myself back in contact with God. And had I not done this practice from another faith, I wouldn't have had this experience that I could trust as an authentic experience, because it wasn't some priest or minister telling me what to believe. It was just me on my cushion, alone in a room. I decided to recognize that what I was experiencing was not an empty mind, but the divine presence.
The greatest moments that I've experienced spirituality has been seeing people who make that life commitment to sort of break the momentum of living in a capitalist society, who say, okay, I'm going to try to create order in this society. I'm going to use my life to try to create peace. That's the transformative moment for me. It's not in churches for me. It's not. It's an active engagement in the world.
Saying this. I can hear James Dobson and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson say, I was called by God to do what I'm doing. You feel called by God.
I do, but I don't feel called by God to impose my life on yours. I believe that I'm called by God to keep God a constant question in the human heart. I believe that anything that isn't, that anything that uses God as an instrument of oppression on other people is not of God. And I believe that their belief is a powerful witness. I just simply do not believe that it can be imposed on the beliefs of people who are witnessing to another face of God.
Like Nietzsche and Ruth, I just don't see any reason to think that in the absence of God, the morality evolved by Homo sapiens is objective. And here Dr. Atkins would agree with me. He says, I see no evidence for its absoluteness. And the ethics of a lion seem to be quite different than the ethics of an antelope. As for human beings, he says, we're just slime on a planet belonging to one sun.
Let us have faith.
To reunite a divided empire, Constantine moved the capital from Rome to a more strategic location, the ancient city of Byzantium, and renamed it Constantinople.
An important part of what was going on here was jockeying at the imperial administration. Clearly, by the end of the 3rd century, Christianity was a major force to be reckoned with throughout the empire, and something that had to either be suppressed or had to be integrated. Galerius, Constantine's rival, who was one of the major instigators of the persecution, favored the option of suppression. Constantine and his associates favored the option of integration.
Constantine was a consummate pragmatist and a consummate politician, and I think he gauged well the upsurge of interest and support Christianity was receiving, and so played up to that very nicely and exploited it in his own rule.
When Constantine came into power and started to favor Christianity, he did do many things that plainly showed his support for Christianity. He gave money for the building of churches, money for the copying of scriptures. He exempted clergy members from having to perform civic duties on town councils, that kind of thing.
The bishops are able to take advantage of Constantine's mood and his curious intellectual interest in things like Christology and the Trinity and church organization. They're able to have Bibles copied at public expense. They're finally able to have public Christian architecture and big basilicas. So there's a comfortable symbiotic relationship between the empire and the church.
And obviously that is going to mean profound changes for the society and for Christianity.
One of the first things Constantine does as emperor is start persecuting other Christians. The Gnostic Christians are targeted. Marcionite Christians and other dualist Christians, Christians who don't have the Old Testament as part of their canon, are targeted. The list of enemies goes on and on. There's a kind of, in a sense, internal purge of the church as one emperor ruling one empire tries to have a single church.
To appreciate the remarkable, dramatic evolution that had occurred in so short a period, one might counterpose the image of Pliny in his courtroom under the Emperor Trajan, sending Christians off to their execution simply for being called Christians, to the majesty of Constantine presiding over the great gathering of bishops that he had called to resolve particular questions.
I agree with you. I mean, in the practice of medicine, one-on-one with a patient in a relationship that is so utterly unique, you know, it's so rare that one has that degree of concentration in dialogue with another human being. And I find in even the small sort of illnesses all the way to the end-of-life situations, you know, they're all very spiritual experiences.
I agree that giving yourself to others is uplifting and actually may make you happier than if you live only for yourself.
And it seems...
You think it's a joke?
The laughing Jesus is a
No,
joke?
but you think religion is a joke.
Absolutely not.
but it's not incompatible with laughter.
No, not at all. In fact, I mean, there's been some very good books written about laughter and ways in which jokes and laughter can get at the core of things theological.
Well, after seeing Mel Gibson's movie, there doesn't seem to be any room left.
Though Jesus does laugh in Mel Gibson's movie. It's interesting that there's a flashback scene where he does laugh.
When he's with Mary and Mary's trying to educate him?
I think it's when he's in his carpenter shop and he's with Mary. I think he laughs in that scene.
On the atheistic view, then, some action, say rape, may not be socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development has become taboo.
And I believe that people experience connectedness to the world and to others and have these transcendent emotions. But does that say anything about the existence of the supernatural, or is that just a phenomenon that we as human beings experience?
When Mama cooked a sausage, I never got enough. My dad said, eat more bread, boy, you know things are getting rough. We were poor, and that's a fact, but there's one thing we had, a mother blessed with kindness and a Bible-toting dad. When I met her off, and I ever thought I would be.
The imperium on the one hand being used clearly to extinguish a religious movement, the imperium on the other hand being used clearly to undergird and support a religious movement, the same religious movement in so short a period of time.
One more try, please. Up a little more, just a little more surface.
Let us have faith that might make faith right. Might.
It broke apart a little.
That's right.
A little more slow right there.
He fills the flower vases, trims the candle vases, takes small change from the poor box. Tyler has the key. He takes nail and hammer to tack up the banner of felt scraps glued together, reading Jesus lives in me. Alone in the night he marks the words of the preacher. God is feeling your every pain. Repair the Christmas stable, restore the plaster angel. Her lips begin to crumble and her robes begin to peel.
We've got to think about epistemology, the way we know things, how we know things.
For Bible study in the church basement, hear children gospel In the night he mocks the arms of the preacher raised to the ceiling. Tell God your pain.
We've got to think about epistemology, the way we know things. We've got to think about epistemology, the way we know things, how we know things.
To him the world's defiled, in light he sees a likeness there. He swears this Sodom will burn down. Near sacred blood there's a dance hall where Tyler Glenn saw a black girl and a white boy kissing shamelessly. Black hands on white shoulders, white hands on black shoulders dancing. And you know what's more, he's God's man disciple, a righteous title for the word he heard. He's so misunderstood.
But that does absolutely nothing to prove that rape is really wrong. On the atheistic view, there's nothing really wrong with your raping someone. Thus, without God, there is no absolute right and wrong.
No simple-minded, a crippled man to know this man's, to fear this man, to shake when he shake when he shake when he comes. Wasn't it God that led Puritans in Salem to what they did to
cross, the hated symbol of death and defeat, now emerged as the symbol of triumph. And in the eyes of some, the apocalyptic prophecy of Revelation had at last been fulfilled.
The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ.
The kingdom of God and the Roman Empire had now become one and the same. Jesus of Nazareth had become Jesus, and his church had become a power on earth. A new chapter in history was about to begin.
And I heard one clergyman say that belief in miracles began to subside with the invention of the electric light bulb. That let there be light.
The new teaching captivated his imagination.
Tonight, you are enjoying the miracle of radio. Radio at its finest over frequency modulation.
I felt an overpowering need to understand something of the riddles of the world in which we live, and perhaps even to contribute something to their solution.
I've not quite succeeded in growing up on that point. There is still too much of Mummy's lost little boy about me. No more of the old security. It was sea and islands now. The great continent had sunk like Atlantis.
Freud enters into the university at a point where materialism, the notion that our bodies are collections of chemicals and chemical processes, has been victorious. The body now becomes something mechanical that can be understood through science, through lab science. I mean, this is a world in which realities of the body are at the center, not the metaphysics of the spirit.
See, I think that notion that we really have the spark of the divine. Every person you meet, whatever culture, background, when you take the time to listen to the stories, you see where God has, the hound of heaven, has really been after that person or has touched that person, and they've never had a chance to share it because they would not even call themselves religious. And
but this hound of heaven, the small voice, the spark, these are words trying to describe something.
That's part of the journey, trying to put inadequate wording to something that's so majestic and so unbelievable. It's just hard to know how to...
Here's a problem. I'll tell you what troubles me about this conversation.
But the problem is that objective values do exist, and deep down, we all know it. There's no more reason to deny the objective reality of moral values than the objective reality of the physical world.
Because I feel like I'm getting lost a bit, is number one,
the extent that people do have these religious or spiritual experiences, whether you call it an oceanic feeling or transcendent experience or some sense of connectedness, it's not clear, even if you label it spiritual, where that gets you.
For me, the scientific worldview generates that kind of feeling of transcendence. An early experience, I suppose, would be Carl Sagan's Cosmos. I think Carl, more than anybody else, gave the feeling of the pure emotional awe and wonder and joy at the miracle of life, and the cosmos is so big and vast and grains of sand, and we're just one. And
I hear the aging footsteps like the motion of the sea. Sometimes I turn, there's someone there. Other times it's only me. I am hanging in the balance of the reality of man. Like every sparrow falling, like every grain of sand.
It certainly generates in me a feeling of spirituality. I feel like a spiritual person without a belief in God.
Does the popularity of Mel Gibson's film, The Passion, mark the beginning of a new image of Jesus? That raises the question of whether or not the assertion made by Mr. Gibson that he's following scrupulously the gospel text is true. It seemed to indicate that what your father sees as the excesses of the movie, or the incompatibility with the portrayal in the movie with basic science, raises the point that Mark describes it, that the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do not suggest a basis for the extreme, the savagery that we see in the motion picture, correct?
Not at all. I mean, you can really only find one line in the Gospels about Jesus being lashed and whipped and all that scourging that we see in the film. Right. And that takes about 45 minutes in the movie.
We can spell that out a little bit. In Matthew, there is mention of being scourged before taken to Golgotha. That is the arduous process to get there. He was crowned with thorns, he was spit upon, and he was smote or hit on the head.
You know, we certainly don't get a sense of the violence that attends the trial and the execution of Jesus. We don't get that in the Gospels
there's no mention. Let me clarify. There's no mention of scourging in John, and that brings us to another interesting question we can raise with you. And we are joined on the live line, and he's actually been listening to us, and he may choose to comment on what you've said thus far. David Brickner, who is the executive director of Jews for Jesus.
Do you understand?
modulated, frequency populated.
Forever.
Your interference free.
Forever and ever.
Is the universal media network.
Ever and ever.
Even when they're not.
Well, if there is a forever, this is certainly it. If you don't believe me, stick around. Forever. This is KPFA in Berkeley, KPFB in Berkeley, KFCF in Fresno, KZFR in Chico. We are surrounding the state of California with the concept that there is no God. Don't be frightened. It's not a new idea. Just being brought up again for your consideration. Please. It's Over the Edge till 3 a.m. tonight. It's All in Your Head, Part 6.
Which is celebrating, I believe, its 30th year. Is that right, David Brickman?
Let's see, since 1981, what would that be? Over the Edge has been here since 1981, intends to be here forever, as I just mentioned. And so that would be, that's right, 33 years, the age of Christ. We think.
Well, John, it's good to be with you. And actually, on the cornerstone of our headquarters, we have a little plaque that says Jews for Jesus, established 32 AD, give or take a year.
Actions like rape, cruelty, and child abuse aren't just socially unacceptable behavior. They're moral abominations. Some things, at least, are really wrong.
Were you agnostic before? Or did you have a spiritual worldview and change from that to what you call by a scientific worldview? I take it that you mean a secular worldview?
I mean a naturalism is my philosophy.
23 years. And a couple more years, it'll be a quarter of a century. A quarter of a century that we have all been held over the edge.
That's nothing compared to forever.
Well, some people who don't like the show might think it's forever.
I love it, and I certainly do.
Well, I expect you to be to be totally actually objective about this, certainly. Been a lot of water under the bridge.
Oh, yes, we've changed a lot. In the beginning, I was afraid to say there was no God, but not anymore.
But you were just quivering in your boots. That's right. You weren't very controversial back in those days.
Well, that was the Reagan days, you know.
Yeah, but you had, fake Stone Age and all those Refrigerator Lady and all those other voices and stuff. And,
yeah. None of them believed in God.
None of them believed in God, but
don't
they were
believe
all
a
afraid
single
to
one.
say so. There was like a hidden fear. There was a time when being an atheist, I remember this, in the early 60s, being an atheist was almost as bad as being a communist. I mean, you just didn't dare even, that was down there next to being a pervert or
and
something.
Part of what was wrong with being a communist was that they were all atheists.
Yeah, but there was a subversive element also that was... Pacifica was formed back in the days when the communists were trying to get inroads into the country. In a way, you're a artifact of the McCarthy era. Not you personally, but Pacifica.
I don't know whether you've noticed, but we've come full circle now with George W. Bush, a born-again Christian as president. Watch out. He is, as all fundamentalists are, an absolutist. Remember what he said? You're with us or you're against us. Well, gee, I don't know. I've seen a lot of things that I might have been with him and partly against him, or I might have not been with him but not too against him, or I might have been completely against him but with him a little. No more relativism. With us or you're against us. It's all in your head.
Well, I would much sooner have a born-again Christian than any variety of Mohammedan devils. Mohammedan devils must die.
Now, he's probably wrong about that. I hope you understand.
That all phenomena have natural explanations.
And all opinions can just naturally be wrong.
There is no supernatural. There's just the natural and stuff we can't yet explain.
I will go along with that, however.
That's basically my position.
Yes. Stay tuned tonight for another Sci-Fi Aside with Buck Logic later on tonight, and he will be talking about this very thing. What? This thing.
Socially, when I moved from theism to atheism, and science as a worldview, I guess, to be honest, I just liked the people in science and the scientists and their books and just the lifestyle and the way of living. I liked that better than the religious books, the religious people I was hanging out with. Just socially, it just felt more comfortable for me.
A real clear,
no, it was,
one day here, one day here?
No, a couple years with.
So it was a relationship-driven decision?
Not solely, but the intellectual stuff and all that's part of it. But if you're going to be honest, it's not just reasoning your way to a position.
But the organization itself, you're right, it's celebrated its 30th year this past year.
There are two ways of looking at the gospel text, and that one of the ways they're not in conflict with each other, but one is the emphasis on the atonement, the redemption, the incarnation, of course, of the Son of God becoming man.
I got to admit, the pagan crowd is a nice group of people, and in fact, I always hung out with atheists or people who didn't believe in God. Part of that was because atheist women were more likely to have sex with you.
I was always nervous about people who didn't trust atheists because they'd usually say something like, well, if you don't believe in God, then why don't you just go out and start doing all sorts of evil acts because you know you can get away with it. But you see, if the only thing that's keeping you from doing evil acts is a fear of hell, then I don't know if I feel too comfortable around you.
Yes, these are all ancient traditions that go back to the days when it actually did work. If you do that, you're going to hell. The wrath of God shall be upon you. And people were fairly afraid of that, and it seemed to work for a while. We actually became more civilized and nicer to each other, and there was less murder and rape and pillage.
And even Jesus didn't say too much about, the horrors of hell, and that's why you should be good. He usually said, well, wouldn't you want people to treat you that way, or logical arguments like that.
But it only works on children, and the children of that time who were adults but were not educated beyond a child's level, any of them. It tended to work for a few centuries on those kind of people.
Well, even today, many people act like children.
Yes, and to those people it still works, and that's, I suppose, what keeps it going, stupid people. But we have passed the age of reason. Many of us have been educated at your higher universities, and we've taken comparative religion. We've seen the light. We know where it all comes from. We know it's all in our heads, and so we're becoming a bit impatient with the supernatural God concept who is going to kill you if you do wrong. He won't. Just do something wrong. Prove it.
Or sometimes he's looked at like Santa Claus. If you just pray to him enough, or if you're a good boy, you'll get your rewards.
People say, well, what's going to happen after we get rid of the God concept? Well, you're going to have everything you have now. You're going to have all the same stuff, all the same institutions and charities and You're going to have all your helping hands and all that stuff that churches do that's probably pretty good for society. You're just going to be minus the supernatural God concept. Well, where does that leave us? Right here, right where we are, right where we always were.
And we still have a lot of supernatural concepts even without religion.
That charity works just as good without a God as it does with, if you ask me.
Well, and sometimes better without God getting in the way, because sometimes God gets his share and then what's left over goes to charity. But if you get the divine aspect out, then you don't need to spend so much on candles and statues.
Yeah. The doctrine ruins everything. And not to mention their coffers full of gold and rubies that they've sacked away from the rest of the world.
Yeah, the Vatican still has a lot of treasures, and some of it that even came from the Nazis, right?
I don't know. I just don't know. All I know is it's all in your head.
What was that number again? What was that number again?
5, 1, 0, 8, 4, 8, 4, 4, 2, 5.
And the price that was paid to redeem mankind is what you saw on the screen. There is the political, there is the moral, other interpretation of events.
I don't mean to go off subject, but when the whole idea of the Nazi stuff being in the Vatican made me think of Dave Emery.
Ah, yes, he'd know about that.
Yeah, and I just, it made me think of Dave. Sometimes when I'm listening to this show, I think of Dave.
Well, who wouldn't?
He is kind of God to me.
Well, if he's listening, I wish he'd call in. We'd like to ask him about that treasure in the Vatican.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that too.
What else is down in those vaults?
Yeah, Dave would know.
I bet if there's anything embarrassing down there, you're never going to find out.
I don't know. Unless we could dig a hole.
Just turn me to salt, dye me blue, and let the cows lick me into the homunculus of remorse.
There could be homunculus maybe somewhere down in the vaults.
Well, when I'm done with my wanderings, I, too, will lie upon those de-waved, scrawled sands, and starfish radiant beneath the earth will crawl across my frozen food body.
I'm not entirely sure if you'd find that down in the vaults, but then, we're not going to know.
No, that guy is going to hell for sure. He is having way too much fun.
Well, this is serious stuff, and sometimes the way people handle serious stuff is by poking fun at it, because organized religion is very scary and very real, and sometimes you have to find a few yucks in there to help yourself get by.
Well, how do you make sense of the other now?
In reality, I think most of us arrive at most of our beliefs for non-rational reasons.
I think that's definitely the case with Dave Emery.
And then we justify them with these reasons after the fact.
Well, as a psychiatrist, I think that we are primarily beings of feeling more than of thought. And I think that most of our decisions are often are made on the basis of what we feel instinctively.
See, now that's a tough one, because sometimes feelings can come across, we can convey them with the language of intellect, and it could get a little confusing in there. I think that's how I experienced Dave Emery, for example. I think that he comes across as having a lot of ideas, of having done the archival work, of having done the research, but when he speaks, all I really hear is the language of emotion, which really does kind of make me think that there's something about Dave Emery and his program that's really akin to organized religion.
I miss Dave Emery as well.
Do you?
Oh, so much.
Yeah, how do you get by?
Well, I wake up every morning and I decide whether or not I should commit suicide, and so far the answer has been consistently no.
Well,
I think everybody should do that.
Yeah, I think that you come to the same answer every day.
Well, so far, I'm here to talk about it.
You haven't had any, like, kind of mishaps or anything like that?
Well, it's not like I have a sort of Damocles with a decaying thread over my head or anything.
We had a preacher named Macduff that came into our town. He said old-time religion is surely coming down. He said that I'd be better off if I would just repent. Now I'm doing better than I was, 'cause down the aisle I went.
When I was a boy, my old grandpa said to me, take this Bible in your hand, grandson.
And so I wonder in all of us, how much of it we are influenced by people that we meet, whom we admire and want to be like.
There is a truth with a capital T.
Know it in the same way.
But we know it in a different way.
Do Jews for Jesus accept the divinity of Jesus Christ?
Well, we would stand with the answer that one of the first Jews for Jesus gave when Jesus asked the question, "Who do men say that I am?" and then followed it up with a direct question to Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" He said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And we're Jews for Jesus just like Peter, James, and John were, so that's our conviction.
The theories of Darwin, which were then of topical interest, strongly attracted me, because they held out hopes of an extraordinary advance in our understanding of the world.
He's a very smart guy, and he's reading the hot philosophers of the late 19th century. He reads Feuerbach, he reads, or at least learns about Nietzsche. They argue that human beings have to be understood as biological entities in the world.
Freud's passion was science. But the material world didn't replace his old love of the humanities. Along with biology and mathematics, he also chose a class on religious belief given by the philosopher Franz Brentano, a former Catholic priest.
Brentano demonstrates the existence of God with as little bias and as much precision as another might argue the advantage of the wave over the emission theory.
Franz Brentano is one of the cult figures at the university when Freud is studying. He's a guy who has this kind of charisma that we associate with the great teacher. Brentano's philosophy is, in point of fact, a kind of a throwback philosophy. It's a philosophy that is, to be simplistic about it, romantic in its attempt to tie up every aspect of the universe.
I hope that, in the end, you will all be more persuaded that a casual study of philosophy leads us away from God. But to delve more deeply into it is to be led back to Him again.
I have not escaped from his influence. I am not capable of refuting the simple theistic argument that constitutes the crown of his deliberations. Indeed, I am making a thorough study of his philosophy. Meanwhile, I reserve judgment as to the question of theism and materialism.
Similarly, love, equality, and self-sacrifice are really good. Thus, we can summarize this third consideration as follows. Premise 1, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Two, objective values do exist. 3, therefore, God exists. Number 4, the historical facts concerning the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, was a remarkable individual. New Testament critics have reached something of a consensus that the historical Jesus came on the scene with an unprecedented sense of divine authority, the authority to stand and speak in God's place. He claimed that in himself the kingdom of God had come, and as visible demonstrations of this fact, he carried out a ministry of miracles and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands, and thus evidence for the existence of God.
What did you find, Stephen, about the Jews and their regard for Jesus, stemming from the famous lecture by Rabbi Wise, 1925?
That's right. I didn't really investigate Jews for Jesus proper. I investigated Jews who don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah.
And that stemmed from this talk by Wise.
Well, and before the 1925 talk by Wise, I found between the Civil War, essentially, and the 1920s, virtually every major reform liberal rabbi in the United States wrote a major book or pamphlet on Jesus. And they all agreed that he was a great rabbi, he was a great Jew, and the only question was, what kind of Jew?
Now, Dr. Atkins says, this is the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, to them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experiential reality which gave significance to their lives.
A different naturalistic way. It's all natural.
the answer.
I think the tricky part of this discussion and the sort of the pink elephant in the middle of the table that we're not talking about is really going to come down to experience.
Yes.
And it's a very difficult thing to talk about with people who don't accept religious experience as being a real thing.
And that's the problem I think some people have with religion. If someone says, I've had a religious experience and I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and rose from the dead, I can't quarrel with whether or not someone actually believes that. Perhaps they do. The question is whether I should believe it as well.
What do you mean impose?
Well, I believe that when to have the voice of religion, to have the religious voice in the public arena, as far as I'm concerned, is very faithful to the intention of the Founding Fathers. Therefore, no established church, no established church, no single church or tradition that monitors and weighs and measures everybody else's attitudes, approaches, or moral decisions.
Freud, not only with Brentano, but with others, and especially within himself, contemplated and reflected upon the whole question of the proof of the existence of God, or the converse, disproving the existence of God. He came to the conclusion that it was not possible to definitively prove or disprove God's existence. It is not really a scientific question.
A tool of our instincts, and that we are all compelled to behave cleverly or stupidly by the commands of our emotional attitudes.
Now, if this is so, then there's a danger that proofs for God could actually distract your attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make his existence evident to you.
I believe that that's absolutely essential, especially in a pluralistic world where we're all looking for the voice of conscience in our hearts. But when you take the religious voice and you turn it into a religion in the center of the system, do it our way, there's something wrong with that.
But they are saying they're acting from moral concern, that they are trying to carry their moral values into the public square.
And so did the Puritans and the Prohibitionists. It was exactly, they believed that their moral values should be carried into the public arena. And we did it. When the Puritans did it, they burned witches, all in the name of God. When the Prohibitionists did it, they decided what you could and couldn't discipline yourself to do.
But I don't hear these people talking as harshly as that. They're not going to burn you at the stake, although some of them might think you're a witch, right?
Oh, yeah.
A pagan, a pagan.
Listen carefully for the twigs.
Nouveau Ordo Seclorum. What you want is what's coming. You do not understand the terms of politics. You do not, you won't know what hit you, just like you were saying. You see, I used to be a saying around my house, oh, you didn't even know what hit him. I thought, well, my God, I'll know whatever hits me. So, yeah, I understand the language. When the Third Reich was in power and they killed Christians, they would torment them with Romans 12. You understand how perverted that was? But yet, it would take a rigorous argument before well,
see, we're all one people, man. It's just, you just gotta understand the energy flows like all through us, you know, like every single direction.
Evil energy flows also.
But that's all part of the universal. You just gotta open up your whole
yin and yang. I understand the yin and yang.
For real, you do a little yin, you go over, you do a little yang. You don't spend too much time in either area. Fine, man. You don't need 6 weeks of the same show to know that.
Well, you haven't caught on yet.
Man, there's a whole other program about all of this, man. The energy super sphere, baby.
You ain't heard nothing yet.
Oh, I heard that one guy.
Break it on down now.
Let me ask you, if there was no God, just for argument's sake now, don't get frightened. If just hypothetically, if there was no God, what would be wrong with morality and conscience? What would be wrong with those if there was no God?
I can't hang with this hypothetical. It's too much. We don't even have hypotheticals. It's like Ali G. We can't understand it.
Let him answer. Let him answer. He's the believer.
Here's what I would say. We can see it right now. People really don't believe in God, and look what's going on. Look what's going on. You think George Bush is a believer?
Do you think morality and conscience are gone?
In a lot of people, yeah.
Were they ever there in a lot of people?
I think there was a little more of it before, but
you have to
understand.
Now wait a minute. What makes you think that there was a little more of it before?
Just a quick historic review in front of my head.
You have no evidence of that.
Well, I would say that we didn't see a serial killer. We did not see a serial killer until Jack the Ripper.
I'm just saying, just for the sake of saying it, I guess
I haven't been calling on as much because
get that yo-yo out of here.
That everybody's equal here. If there was no God,
what would make everyone equal? You see, might would make right.
If, just for argument's sake, there was no God,
I follow.
I think morality and conscience would not go away any more than they ever have, might not grow any more than they ever have, but there would be just like it is now, and I'm just wondering, what's it worth? What's it worth without the God concept? Is it worth as much or not as much, or it works better, or it works as well, or it doesn't work as well? What's your idea on that?
Yeah, for real, break it down.
My idea is that the existence of Jesus is the only thing that gives anything any worth at all. And if you don't have that within you, if you don't have that concept understood within you, then, yeah, it wouldn't be worth anything except what you can immediately take pleasure in and what you can get your hands on. And that's what we see. Don't you see?
I think they're motivated more or less by something inside your head that sees a mutuality of consciousness. You know what I mean by that?
I think that your position is that of the process. It's Nouveau Ordo Seclorum. Your logic, you're not really taking all the evidence down.
That's right. You got me pegged there.
Well,
I can't even say it.
The politics of it all, it's coming right to your door.
Look, the biggest offense in religion is the supernatural God concept. It's what makes it absolute. It's what makes it so dangerous. It's what makes it so divisive. It's what makes it so destructive. If you take away the supernatural God concept and keep all the rest, we'll be doing just fine, and we won't be killing everybody else who doesn't think the same way we do.
It's like you've said before, it is too late now. It has become so twisted that, yeah, people are not only willing to die over the whole business, they're willing to kill.
It's not too late. That's silly.
It is way too late, sir.
Haven't you ever heard of forever?
Have you ever heard of the Arabs with the A-bomb? We're in World War III here. Do you understand what's going on?
That is why I am endeavoring to devote this program forever to this concept, because if we don't do it soon, it will be too late.
You don't have a chance.
Oh, yes, I do.
The only chance that you have is if you're actually promoting the enemy's position.
You're listening, aren't you?
Well, that's because I just teaching in the night, reaching for the light.
Is everyone else. They are all listening.
You know, I understand what you're doing better than what you do yourself. And so, yeah, I do participate. I do pay attention.
We are changing your mind slowly but surely.
You said it yourself on one of your own things. Radio is an instrument of psychological warfare.
Yes, but sometimes it can be put to a constructive use. It is the tools of the devil put to the power of good.
Here's what your supernatural God has wrought.
Badawi called his father to say he was becoming a martyr. He urged his mother not to wail at his funeral. Less than an hour after making that phone call, Israeli soldiers killed Badawi just as he was about to open fire on the Jewish settlement.
All of that paled into insignificance in contrast with this rapturous celebration of death.
At his funeral, Mazen's mother fulfilled his wish. She let out a traditional shriek of joy reserved for weddings and births. Mohammed Badawi and his family believe that Mazen has been reborn into another world.
Do not think those that die for God are really dead, but rather they live in the shadow of God, in the paradise of Eden. Those that have gone and have become martyrs are happy with their destiny, and so it is forbidden for their relatives to be angry with them.
Like other suicide martyrs, Mazen left a last will and testament. He tells his mother, "Don't cry for me. These words are painful. I shall greet you at the gates of paradise." Mazen also asked his father to take care of his 2-year-old daughter to compensate for his absence. Like other families of suicide assailants, Mohammed Badawi received approximately $15,000 from Iraq through Hamas. The Hamas movement also regularly contributes food, blankets, and other essentials. Saudi Arabia granted several dozen relatives of suicide attackers a free trip to Mecca for the annual pilgrimage. Mazen's wife, Wisal, is pregnant with his second child. All she has left of her husband now is this Quran.
Yeah, WLOKI sur le MIC représente le sud de Paris et le Maghreb uni. Kaya Balta dans la Sepla. Yes, c'est de la bombe rouillard. 100% arbé.
Eh mec, c'est où? Soit tu restes assis, ça te fait boue. Eh mec, c'est où? Soit tu te mets debout sur la roue. Eh mec, c'est où? Soit tu restes assis, ça te fait boue. Eh mec, c'est où? Soit tu te mets debout sur la roue.
Frère, calcule pas comme quelqu'un, faut que tu te cales, focalise pas, surtout pas. Surveille tes poches, les poches des montres de black et de peur, qui font plus peur à l'homme blanc, qui vote plus blanc, qui veut plus de noir, qui tire plus balle à blanc. En bref, nique la fonction des bras d'homme. On s'en bat les couilles, ta déclaration des droits de l'homme, ton père 60 ans.
There is no single way to describe the Muslim community in Britain. It is as diverse in its opinions as any other segment of the British population. There are generational differences, gender differences, doctrinal differences, and plain old liberal versus conservative differences of opinion. One solution to the mystery of why global jihad has found a narrow but secure perch in Britain may be this. For people who feel lost in a complex world, the simple message of a demagogue like Omar Bakri will always have an appeal. Sheikh Omar seems to know this, and he is very confident that his message is reaching more and more people willing to wage jihad against the U.S.
Les blancos qui sont pas chauds comme Musso, les nids d'Italie. Non mec ici c'est Loki, tout droit venu des bergeries. Représente le sud de Paris et le Maghreb uni. Sur le beach bute toutes les putes qui nous ont enlevé la vie.
Palestine is very dear to us, and she deserves that every young man will be a martyr for her. I call on every Palestinian young man to follow in my son's footsteps. Israel understands.
Militant Islamic movements like Hamas use heroic martyrs like Mazan Badawi in order to recruit volunteers for suicide missions. There's no shortage of such volunteers. As one Israeli intelligence official put it, for every Palestinian gunman killed, there are 5 new volunteers for suicide missions.
September 11th represented. And the ability to overcome that now hurdle, which these young men created and put before a person like myself.
There have been more than 50 so far in the past year. Many of Gaza's youth are indeed inspired by suicide assailants like Mazan Badawi. They often take suicidal risks in confronting Israeli tanks and armor, Many are too young to understand the consequences of such actions, and that worries Palestinian psychiatrists like Dr. Iyad Zakut.
Many children identify with these martyrs, and they try to simulate these people and do the same actions. And we have many children, unfortunately, actually, trying to do this at an early age. And we had to talk to the parents, to the families. The families even themselves do not want to lose their children. It's not their rule to go and throw stones or to harm the army, the Israeli army, because they cannot, actually. And they expose themselves to great danger, and this will create more and more victims in our society.
And it's West Bank. And the Muslim community is involved in introspection, at organized meetings, and in one-to-one conversations with each other and people who are not Muslim.
Our interview with Dr. Zakut was interrupted by 2 Israeli Cobra helicopters. They fired missiles into a nearby Palestinian police headquarters. After the crowd had rushed to the site, an Israeli F-16 dropped a bomb on the target. The crowd ran away just in time and then returned once more, flirting with the chance of being killed in a surprise airstrike.
After the Omar Bakri meeting at Woolwich Mosque, a young man approached me. He was clean-shaven, dressed in business clothes, clearly not part of the regular circle. He wanted to know what I thought about the Sheikh. We made an arrangement to meet in the more secular setting of a Starbucks near St. Paul's Cathedral. The tape recorder could be on, provided no name was used. This man, a computer technician in his late 20s, tried to explain the appeal of the radical preacher.
Sheikh Umar Fakir Mohammed, he's almost a magician, really. Their attraction seems to be that here's a man who's extremely charismatic. He speaks with an enormous amount of passion. The way he goes out in the street, the way he openly speaks about the evil, the way he doesn't seem to compromise, the way the media seem to always attack him left, right and centre. You know, young people seem to think, this is a guy that's talking sincerity. And if you're at age around 17, 19, 20, if you don't have a job, which is most of the people don't have a job there, this kind of man appeals to you.
Avec leur système qui tourne autour du cheville. Ils ont ruiné nos pays. Mat, ils ont ramené la guerre en Algérie. Ça me fait tchépi. Plein de petits arbés voient la zermie. Et nous ici, on se dit pas de soucis. Trop d'hypocrisie. T'en bats les couilles. Ton voisin mate même pas s'il a faim. Un signe de trahison envers les saints. Rap noir, lève-toi. Rota sera ta va tes remparts. Qui sont ces cadeaux à travailler pour le blanc trop pas. Trompant tes parents. En troquant leur sueur contre un peu d'argent. Puis les stockant dans des habitats désolants. Désolé, ton fils est devenu un délinquant. Le pire, c'est qu'ils se butent avec ses runs pour des histoires à 1 franc. Maghreb détruit, pendant que l'Europe s'enrichit. Et nous ici, on se dit c'est la galère, la zermie. Alhamdoulilah, je dors dans mon lit. Je mange, bois, et même le week-end je vais en 2 bois. Et toi la Kaira, va voir à Alger si t'aurais eu cette chance-là. Cette chance-là. Eh mec c'est où? Soit tu restes assis, tête fait mou. Eh mec c'est où? Soit tu te mets debout sur la roue. Eh mec c'est où? Soit tu restes assis, tête fait mou. Eh mec c'est où?
soit tu te mets debout sur la roue.
La double M s'amène, des beurs débarquent dans le secteur. Pour faire parler de notre âme est à la page, on parle de femmes. Ce peuple qu'on déteste plus pour ce qu'il est que ce qu'il fait.
It's like ice water going up and down your spine. I felt something touch my right hand like a hand touching my hand. Repression is of the devil. Spiritual contact.
It was a triangle-shaped craft hovering over Glendale.
Well, Monkey, you tinker and trifle. I think your motivation is you've got the music for it. I bet you don't even understand the term secular.
And others who think the same way. Then just looks like the labor of Sisyphus.
Approximately 40 Palestinians were injured in this attack. The Israelis say these airstrikes deter, but Palestinians say they breed more anger, more martyrdom, and more suicide attacks.
The strangers, Canada, USA, France, Britain, have ceased to focus on the unknown, the mysterious, because they do not believe in God. Europe stopped believing in God, so why should I speak in our language? I will speak in their terms. I have land and the paradise of Eden. I have Palestine. My land is occupied, and I'm trying to liberate it.
According to the young man, the Sheikh continues to find new adherents because of the actions of Western leaders.
These groups, they're helped by people like George Bush. He's like a gift for these radical Muslims where he says, you're either with us or you're against us. And that fits in perfectly what Sheikh Omar's been saying for the last 10 years. You've got to be either with the Christians or the non-believers, or you've got to be against them.
But let me ask the question straightforwardly. Does the Islamic tradition, as you understand it, allow or does it not allow someone to, in that manner, kill innocent people? And if he does or she does that person go to paradise?
You see, this is a modern way of change. It was not. It wasn't there in this tradition, in the Quran or the tradition of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now this is a modern thing that some scholars basically dig deep into the tradition and they issue this fatwa. But it wasn't there. So I can't say myself that a person who does this, he will be rewarded paradise. No, I can't say it.
You infect my world with your presence.
Rafi.
Two things, Chris. We must be very clear. Fatwa is a legal opinion. It's not even the judgment of a court. It's a legal opinion of one scholar. You can have conflicting fatwas too. They will base it upon argument and precedent, but it's a legal opinion of one scholar. And quite categorically, Islam does not allow the slaughter of innocents. Absolutely categorically.
Like it or not, we saw pictures on our television sets of Muslim groups, Muslim people celebrating the attacks on September the 11th. Why is it that some people, at least in the Muslim world, believe that the bombers were right? Is it the fault of the politicians?
No, look, this is because these bombings had a very heavy political significance.
But do you accept that in the Islamic world, Islam is also being deliberately misinterpreted by what we in the West would call fundamentalists?
I think we must understand that in the Islamic world, and indeed in other third world countries, Hindus and perhaps Buddhists, etc., religion is a very important part of the psyche about the identity of the person, much more than it is in the West, where we have a much wider secular space than we have in a Muslim country.
We spoke until closing time, and just before the harried Starbucks staff threw us out, the young man said something that gave a real glimpse into the mystery of why. Why the appeal of jihad for young Muslims in Britain?
Young Muslims are thinking, how can one man like Osama bin Laden create so much havoc? It's mind-boggling. Imagine if all the Muslim countries were to unite as one, which is what they're asking for. This is what the young Muslims are thinking. If all these Muslim countries were to unite under one leader, a pan-Islamic state, that America's seen its last days, which is what the young Muslims are thinking.
Therefore, religious symbols and symbolism are very powerful, and it can easily politicize. So you can have leaders who are so-called radical Muslims who can use symbols and use the word jihad and fatwa, etc., and can work up masses. Also remember the demography of these countries. We're talking about very young populations without any future, without any economic future. We have countries, Muslim countries, which have corrupt governments, which on the whole are being colluded with by Western governments. So that's the other thing that Ghada is also right about the Palestinians, but there's also the business in the Arab countries where Arabs feel very alienated from their own governments.
Perhaps the prospect of being on the winning side is the reason some young British Muslims acknowledge Islam as a force in their lives deserving higher loyalty than their country.
A frightened and tearful Ibrahim Rayan had made his last statement just before going on a suicide mission for Hamas. A short while later, he killed 2 Jewish settlers in Gaza, and then he was gunned down. Ibrahim's father says Islam does not usually strive for death and suicide.
Our religion obligates us to good deeds and a long life. And we are the lovers of life, not death, just like you. But when we lost our land, why should we not lose life as well?
This is really, in the end, to do with a perceived imbalance, injustice between the two sides of the world, the haves, the have-nots. It's also, if you like, an expression of anger at what is seen as American arrogance, American imperialist postures, America lording it about, telling people what to do, etc.
Abdel Aziz Rantizi is a prominent Hamas spokesman. He encourages suicide attacks with regular demonstrations. Suicide brigades often march in such protests, where they have staged mock suicide attacks. Abdelaziz Rantizi said there is great motivation among youth to volunteer for such missions.
And why a few are ready to take arms against British soldiers or plot to murder their neighbors.
But we cannot, of course, ignore the fact that there is a feeling in the West about something called fundamentalism, something called Muslim fundamentalism, and we have to take on board that there are movements present amongst Muslims which we would describe as extreme and who use the language of religion to justify certain acts. Now, I would argue that that sort of thing is present in the other two religions. The fact is, of course, that Judaism has fundamentalists, as does Christianity. Both of these groups also advocate extreme measures, sometimes using violence, coercion, etc.
If you are not in the same situation like us, you can't understand why our youth prefer to die, to put an end for their life, just to make Israelis to feel the feelings of our mothers, our daughters, our sons who lost their neighbors.
On the London Underground, but it is only one part of the mystery's solution. Another part lies in the religion of Islam itself, according to magazine editor Farina Alam.
I think we have lost the concept of compassion and mercy. There's a saying that the Prophet was sent as a mercy to the world, but we've turned him into a tyrant.
All over the world, the editor points out, Islam is going through violent change.
It is a war within Islam. I think there's a certain brand of Islam that has manifested itself from within us, and we need to fight that.
Abdul Rentizi participated in Mazen Badawi's funeral. He said Hamas discourages married men like Mazen from becoming martyrs. But, says Rentizi, their desire to commit suicide attacks is too strong.
Using the language of religion. Now, I would argue that the question of religion for these groups is a convenient kind of language, if you like, label.
That Islam doesn't have to be the Islam of Osama bin Laden. And I can say it shamelessly, I can say it very proudly, that I'm willing to fight against my own people, because the Quran says, fight for justice, even if it's against your own mother. We need to pick up the courage to do that. I think it does take courage, and especially if you feel you live in a world that is hostile to you.
Just to build something hopeless and difficult to struggle against, and anything you do is so minute. And the aloneness that I feel in the Middle Eastern world.
It's certainly true that people are devout in the Islamic world. Religion means something to them in a way that it doesn't in much of the secular West. And therefore, using the language and the imagery of Islam, to take an example, has a resonance for ordinary Muslims. So if you like, that's the kind of relationship between Islam, ordinary Islam, and extreme movements like fundamentalist movements.
As a Muslim, I think it takes courage.
But in Britain, there's not yet a critical mass of people within the Muslim community to wage that battle. Despair is not too emotive a word to describe the feelings of many in the community. Aki Nawaz is convinced mass violence against Muslims is just one incident away.
That's a spiritual crisis, but it's not one involving God.
You know, at some point, the Muslims right now, we can see it on the wall. You're going to have to throw your book into one camp or the other, and people will throw the book into Hamza and Bakri's camp, because it's like a way out of all this madness.
I don't begin to doubt even my own lack of faith because of it. It's a sense of sinking into an abyss in which you can't hold on to anything in the world.
It's sad, but I'm looking for the man we thought. Where is he?
There is no single way to describe the Muslim community in Britain. It is as diverse in its opinions as any other segment of the British population. There are generational differences, gender differences, doctrinal differences, and plain old liberal versus conservative differences of opinion. One solution to the mystery of why global jihad has found a narrow but secure perch in Britain may be this. For people who feel lost in a complex world, the simple message of a demagogue like Omar Bakri will always have an appeal. Sheikh Omar seems to know this, and he is very confident that his message is reaching more and more people willing to wage jihad against the U.S. and its...
Don't you bother with me.
I don't know if I ever believed in God, because I figured that I was busy enough trying to stay alive, and I felt almost like pretentious whenever I thought of a God, because I figured, why would he get involved in these little matters here?
Someone asked me the other day, is this a clash of civilizations? My response to that was, yes, there is a clash of civilizations. America against the rest of the world, because the whole thing about American thinking is pretty, underneath the rhetoric of democracy and freedom, there's a lot of oppressive thinking that goes on in America, and they have not used their imagination to go into another culture. For example, to call their operation infinite justice. I felt about laughing when that was, because
of course been changed.
Oh, it has been, because they realized what a faux pas they made in the Muslim psyche. There's nothing infinite except for God. Now, that should have been just basic. They should have known that. There's nothing infinite except for God. Now, that should have been just basic. They should have known that.
Snipers qui tirent à vue sous la pluie des bombes qui tombent, et dans la nuit mon âme a grandi. Désormais l'harmonie règne dans mes veines.
He gave us this to play with, so it's really our problem.
There is in Islam an inherent method whereby you were permitted and encouraged, in fact, during the Middle Ages, to reinterpret religious teaching, called ijtihad, to try and make if you like, adapt the religion to its time, to its surroundings, and that is present as a system. Alas, it was abandoned in the early Middle Ages, and no Muslim scholars ever did that again. And in a sense, Islam remained fossilized. Now, it requires to become unfossilized, to actually come to terms with the modern world, and to re-examine itself.
What's your reaction to that? Is it time for an Islamic Reformation?
There is no need. What is actually needed is scholars
politicians who understand the requirements and needs of their time in terms of culture, in terms of politics, in terms of information revolutions, industrial revolutions and stuff like that, and then adopt their way of life to the teachings of Islam. Islam has got its own fundamentals that you can't change over the ages until the day of judgment, as we believe.
If there is an intervention, it's at the very beginning or the very end of something. And I have to tell you that believing in that relationship with God, the Twin Towers is a lot more acceptable fact, because you don't hate your God for having allowed that, because you know that it's nothing to do with God in the way I believed in religion and God before. It's our toy, our game.
This is It's All in Your Head. KPFA in Berkeley, KFCF in Berkeley, KFB in Berkeley, KFCF in Fresno. That's right. Oh, I'm getting all confused. Too many stations. KZFR in Chico. We're here till 3 with It's All in Your Head on Over the Edge. And isn't it a pity? now, and now, and now, our weekly sci-fi aside for It's All in Your Head. I'm Buck Logic. Well, I just got here, but I understand Anonymous was on mic last week saying that the now fabled page 2, supposedly missing from the Sci-Fi Aside 2 weeks ago, was found, and he read it. All that may be true. It is possible I made a mistake, but I've certainly never done it before, and I don't know why I would have started making mistakes 2 weeks ago. And once I did remember reading that Sci-Fi Aside 2 weeks ago, I certainly don't remember it not making sense, as it surely would have if one of its 3 pages was missing. Now, if I find that Anonymous is actually adding material of his own to my suddenly sought-after Sci-Fi Aside archive of my personal thoughts franchise, which is clearly a body of exclusive thoughts conceived entirely in my head, Buck Logic's head, an archive of almost perfectly articulated predictions concerning the origins of advanced intelligence on this planet, well, me and my sci-fi attorneys are not about to sit idly by while these preciously complex truths get diluted by unauthorized insertions from Mike-greedy network hacks, and I think Anonymous knows who I mean. At any rate, if that missing page was correct, where do we go from there? I was particularly intrigued by the monkey stuff. It led me to think of this. Forget the monkeys. Let's go on another mission much earlier. Back to the ages of dinosaurs, a truly remarkable bunch of very large reptilian species, probably including sophisticated forms like Spielberg's raptors, and probably a lot of grazing dummies whose only protection was their size. But unlikely as this monster-filled environment appears to us today, there it was, we have the skeletons. Dinosaurs roamed the earth for approximately 20 million years. Then they disappeared. All at once. Only the tiny ancestors of crocodiles and sea turtles and a few other little species who could shelter themselves well survived into the second post-meteorite epoch here on Earth and in Earth history. This one, this epoch. But theirs was a different Earth, and back then our whole legacy rested in some tree shrews who had discovered there is much greater safety living in treetops than anywhere else down there. Did you know over 4 million ground shrews were stepped on by dinosaurs yearly, until gradually some of them just stayed up in the trees and cliffs they could escape to when the monsters roamed by. Raptors would have got a lot of them anyway, according to Hollywood and whoever Hollywood was translating into popular appeal. But that doesn't make them wrong either. At any rate, both the shrew and the dinosaur went on evolving together for 20 million years. Pretty good system. Jeez. That's Jesus. I call him Jeez. Geez, that's an extremely successful ecosphere. So long, considering we humans have only been here for about 1 million years. 20 million? We should live so long. And remember, that sci-fi aside from 2 weeks ago, there's something else I left out. It's this. Species with tiny brain cavities, no matter their body size, can live as long in time as any species has any right to expect. 20 million years, for instance. For small-brained dinosaurs. Bravo! But just one little pause. If we have evolved to our present level of intelligence with our present brain cavity size in only about 1 million years, from ape to hominid to human in a few million years, geez, make it 5 million if you want. Give us that much leeway. It's still a buck logic pause giver to realize that the dinosaurs, one of Earth's all-time success stories, evolved for 15 million more years than we have yet showed no sign of an advancement in their intelligence. How long does it take? We have no dinosaur ashtrays from when they took up smoking, no burnt rock circles from when they harnessed fire, no dinosaur musical instruments, no dinosaur art. Well, you can guess all the rest of what they never arrived at in 20 million years. Nope, stability in nature's default state of being. Oh my God, there are so many corrections in this, I can hardly read it. No. Well, forget it. I don't know what I meant by that. No, there seemed to be no need for further intelligence evolvement. No one got more than everyone else had in the real Jurassic Park. The shrews or the dinosaurs, and the movie too, for that matter, all rights reserved. Then the dinosaurs were wiped out all at once in geological history. Surprise, it's over. But they never saw it coming. No dinosaur telescopes either. Best knowledge today, a huge meteorite rammed right into the spinning Earth, our only home, apparently a space rock that was a mile or two across, crashing at thousands of miles per hour right into the southern Gulf of Mexico. Most of the remnants of the huge crater are underwater. It is estimated the eruption from this celestial collision entered the upper atmosphere and darkened the Earth for many years, destroying the stable ecosphere on Earth for an indeterminate amount of time. 99% of all the species of life then on Earth went extinct right there, in that little dead zone line in our history. And it was the 10% who survived in some new way in the poison and in the new post-poison environment who populated the new world. Yes, the meek have already inherited the Earth once, the ones who hid in utter fear the best, scratching ever deeper under anything to protect themselves from a hostile environment. That's why there are so many shy people, and better safe than sorry rules today. It's prehistoric, that meteorite. But let's face it, our genetic ancestors, the tree shrews, weren't getting much smarter over those 20 million years either. What's the point? We shrews could have started painting and sculpting, but when we wanted to exhibit them, the dinosaurs are just going to trample down our museums, and then those raptors sweep in and eat everybody. No, don't even dream. It was impossible. Okay, that's what I left out of that Sci-Fi Aside 2 weeks ago. Now, back to this week's Sci-Fi Aside. Remember the mission? You are a State 3, that's Roman numeral 3, State 3 civilization from one of the older galaxies, not this middle-aged one. Relatively early on in the universe, over in your galaxy, you evolved into the realm of organic advanced intelligence and have kept doing so since. Now you are State 3, typified by the ability to harness the energy of stars. I repeat, typified by the ability to harness the energy of stars, opening up a whole dimension of subatomic and quantum level technologies, as well as the ability to affect your universal will with actual celestial mechanics, forming solar systems, repositioning planets, and so forth. For what purpose? State 3s, maybe they've existed for 20 million years already, State 3s are devoted to cultivating advanced intelligence. It doesn't usually arrive if you just initiate an evolving system of life and sit back and wait. It can happen anywhere it is cultivated, however. That's your mission. So you've got another monster planet getting nowhere over in the South 40 galaxies, and you're over there with all the records. Solar system formed, too many planets originally, one between Mars and Jupiter destroyed, orbital balances achieved to maximize life generation on the two best bets for life generation, Earth and Mars. One-celled life is initiated on both. For a while, both flourish. Then, damn, something we are unable to divulge on the Sci-Fi Aside, something happened and the entire Mars ecosphere went extinct. Evaluations were conducted, and it was decided that in this particular solar system, you should switch your entire focus to the still flourishing Earth and let Mars go. If you reinitiated life there, it would evolve far behind Earth at its present point in organic evolution, and when advanced intelligence began on Earth, over on Mars it would be impossible yet. So when the Earthlings finally reached Mars, they would encounter only the inferior intelligence of primitive beings, a recipe for extermination as eons of experience has shown. So forget Mars. But does this mean that... Oh my God, what a mess. I should have had my secretary type this up. It's just too long. But does this mean your original intention was to breed two forms of advanced intelligence on the two planets simultaneously, guiding things to keep them roughly parallel in their respective evolutions, so Mars and Earth would have arrived at telescopes at around the same time and be able to see each other's civilizations? Very interesting perspectives. But alas, disaster. Mars became the god of war in our skies, going through some ruckus that left it without most of its atmosphere and its whole surface looking scarred and tortured to this day. But let's not get ahead of your mission. You're here to assess the situation you're left with. And now it can be revealed that you have just come over to Earth from Mars, where you had to engulf the whole planet in an inferno and rip away its atmosphere by giving it a close brush with that wobbly planet between Mars and Jupiter, pulverizing the wobbly one, which settled out into an asteroid belt and killing everything on Mars. Well, there's a full report on it. There was no option. Mars had gone wrong. The key organic branches to advanced intelligence housing never developed there, became mutated, maybe slightly too far from the sun. You'll study it more, but Mars is now out of the picture. It happens. And you're back over here, orbiting Earth, and doesn't trouble come in pairs. Nothing but dinosaurs here. You know from some of the other planets you farm that once you let the lizards take over, give them an inch and they'll take a mile every time. The shrews will not go anywhere towards advanced intelligence as long as the dinosaurs rule the ecosphere. Jeez, that's basic training stuff. So a method is selected to exterminate the dinosaurs. Just enough punch, but not too much or you'll lose the shrews too. And you almost did. A firm reprimand for that. By using a meteorite from the newly formed asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter to collide with the Earth at an approximately equatorial region so that the wind movements around the planet will be best exploited. But it was a little off, and instead of a predicted 83% extinction rate, it produced a 90% extinction rate. But it got all the dinosaurs, planet demonsterized, and let the shrews live. So there will be a future here for advanced intelligence. On to the next galaxy. The situation here will be monitored until the next intervention state is reached. And all this, your mission, is happening way before monkeys become a gleam in the eye of shrews here. When we finally get to monkeys, you bring in the surgeons. But that was all explained in the so-called missing page of 2 weeks ago, and is old news now. This has been the Sci-Fi Aside, brought to you by It's All in Your Head. I'm Buck Logic.
Check out the list of available shows on Negativland's website at www.negativland.com.
You were an oasis when I was in the desert, but when I got too close, you'd disappear. Then you'd leave me stranded and feed me drops of water and tell me it was wine and not to fear. And you gave me bread and fishes, spoke of burning bushes, and I drank your blood just to prove my faith. But when I cried an ocean and I asked you to come over, you took a step and sank without a trace. You were singing my song, so I gave you a halo, but you preferred to wear a crown of thorns. I was your disciple, standing in your shadow, and when you spoke, I hung on every word. And you gave me bread and fishes, spoke of burning bushes, and I drank your blood just to prove my faith. But when I cried an ocean and I asked you to come over, you took a step and sank without a trace.
I hope the overseers come back. I want the overlords to return. When they do, I'll show them pictures of atomic explosions. I'll show them what humanity has been able to do. I think that would impress them. They would respect us. A little bit like having a gun. Anybody who has a gun, you instantly pay attention to them and you do what they say, but you respect them. A gun gives you the power of the Almighty.
Well, according to Buck, they're so far ahead of us, you might as well consider them a god. It's all going to look like magic to us.
Absolutely. But if we can show them that we can unleash the power of the atom, I think that they will respect us more than any old slime beings that can't do shit.
The Buddhists, the Dalai Lama has said Jesus is a bodhisattva, a great spiritual giant, and Hindus have said the same thing, or similar things about Jesus, that Jesus was essentially a Hindu divinity who came and incarnated on earth. And you can find Hindu temples in the United States that on Christmas Eve will have services devoted to Jesus.
Saving face, trying to live in a state of grace, and you're not the reason I am. You're just a man, and there's nothing between us that ever move a mountain, nothing that could ever part the sea. Now I'm the one who's bearing the cross of your creation. I'll be crucified and you be free. But you gave me bread and fishes, spoke of burning bushes, and I drank your blood just to prove my faith. But when I cried an ocean and I asked you to come over, you took a step and sank without a trace. And there was I, losing faith. Losing faith.
You know about the doctrine of the virgin birth?
Yes, I do.
That means that Mary conceived independently of any male traditional instrumentality. How many non-Christians believe in the virgin birth?
And whether or not the course of the church or the state should be brought to bear to get me to believe that same thing, or whether my life would be better for it.
In fact, I think the very important issue that this initial question about the Father is that in order to really have a mature spiritual life, you have to move beyond God as the parent in the sky. I think it's almost inevitable that you start out there as a child because that is your model of an authority or a caregiver or providence. But I think if you're really going to become a thinking person of faith, you have to realize that that's a childish vision of God, the best you can do at a certain point, and then you have to move beyond that to something way different than your daddy.
Yes.
And the only question was, what kind of Jew was he? So tremendous reverence for Jesus, where he was compared to Moses and compared to some of the great prophets like Amos and other Jewish heroes.
Well, what distinguishes the theology of Jews for Jesus from Christian theology?
Well, not much. When it comes to the person of Jesus, we would be very conventional in that regard. But let me say that while Dr. Prothero has done a good job of pointing out what the academic view of Jesus is in the Jewish community, I think that there needs to be a little bit of an update in terms of what seems to be more of the man on the street in the Jewish community.
What are you referring to that he wrote?
Well, he talks about the reclamation of Jesus, and that's good. And he says that Samuel Sandmel is perhaps the leader of today's thought with regard to Jews' views of Jesus. But the man on the street in the Jewish community, there's a tremendous schizophrenia within the Jewish community. We're deeply divided, and I think you can see this most clearly in the response of the Jewish community to Mel Gibson's film, The Passion of the Christ. You have, on the one hand, people like Abraham Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League saying it's a dangerous film, it's going to produce anti-Semitism. And then you have other men like Michael Medved, Dennis Prager, Yechiel Eckstein, Lapin, saying, this film is a good film, and Jews as well as Christians should go and see it. And so and this translates into a tremendous kind of schizophrenia, like I was saying. And really what's creating a backlash against the Jewish reclamation of Jesus in the Jewish community today is an inordinate fear of the Christian right.
And how do you do that?
I think it's a process.
How do you change your image that's formed as a child, influenced by the parental authority?
The Bible promises, draw near to God, and He will draw near to you.
I think we have a great deal of information now from other spiritual traditions, particularly Buddhism, Hinduism, the African faiths, things that have allowed us to see God or the sacred or ultimate reality, whatever you want to call that thing, from very different perspectives than just the Judeo-Christian monotheistic Godfather.
Faced with the material world and the spiritual, Freud made his choice.
I found rest and satisfaction in the physiological laboratory of the great Ernst Brücke. For 6 years, through painstaking study, I learned the importance of observation in science. This was the foundation of everything.
Through the end of the century, there are all sorts of major discoveries about the mechanics of the nervous system, and Freud is right in the middle of that. Freud's a neurologist. He learns how nerves work. When Freud goes off and studies the nervous systems of primitive animals, he's doing cutting-edge work. Freud sees himself as Jewish, not religiously as Jewish, but ethnically as Jewish, and he wants to have someone who is compatible to that construction.
They're not. You see them as extremists like that?
I do. In many instances, when you begin to use that kind of religious criteria and translate it into law, into God's call for Armageddon, why are we in Iraq now? God apparently wants us there.
And I think that that's part of the problem that we face in trying to answer that question that Jesus asked, who do you say that I am?
mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the inner voice of God. Speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives.
Not my Jesus.
And they would say we went to Iraq to overthrow a brutal dictator who was persecuting his own people and to prevent Iraq from becoming a terrorist haven. You know what they say.
Sure, and we have a terrorist haven in Iraq right now. We don't have the so-called dictator anymore, but if those are our criteria, then we're going to be, for religious reasons, in a lot of other countries in the next 12 months.
Depending on the sources, Sister Joan, there have been 37,000 civilians killed in Iraq, or as many perhaps as 100,000. Why is abortion a higher moral issue with many American Christians than the invasion of Iraq and the loss of life there?
Could I ask you that question? Because that is the moral question that brings me closest to tears. I do not understand that, Bill. You see, I'm absolutely certain that some of the people that we're killing over there are pregnant women. Now what do you do? Now what do you do? That's military abortion.
Somebody said to me, that's what?
That's military abortion. Why is that morally acceptable?
Somebody said to me the other day that Americans don't behead, but we do drop smart bombs that do it for us.
And that are not smart as we think they are.
So I think we have a more multidimensional way to look at the issue that these guys were struggling with, which was very Freudian.
The trade-off is that in their home, after the marriage, ritual is simply not practiced.
Never thought I would be
whippoorwills call, and evening is nigh. I hurry to my blue.
In conclusion, then, we've yet to see any evidence to show that God does not exist, and we have seen 5 reasons to think that God does exist. Together, these reasons constitute a powerful cumulative case for the existence of God.
You'll see a smiling face, a fireplace, a cozy room.
If Dr. Atkins wants us to believe atheism instead, then he must first tear down all 5 of the reasons that I presented, and then in their place erect a case of his own to prove that God does not exist.
And baby makes 3. We're happy in
Well, what is this smart bomb stuff? We've still got that image in our head from 1991 of this little golf ball dropping down a furnace. It's not working that way.
Dobson, Falwell, Robertson, and a lot of secular pundits and columnists are saying that this election was decided by moral issues. Do you think moral issues were that decisive in this campaign?
Well, I'm not exactly sure that they were as decisive in the end, and I'm not sure that there's any way we can measure that. But even if I say, yes, they were, the fact of the matter is that they are some moral issues. They're not all moral issues. The fact of the matter is that they're all in contention with something else that is also a moral value and also equally important, unless you put it completely out of your mind or your heart. For instance, let's look at the abortion question. I'm opposed to abortion, but I do not believe that just because you're opposed to abortion that makes you pro-life. In fact, I think in many cases your morality is deeply lacking.
and luck, and until he does that, I think we can conclude that theism is the more plausible worldview.
And my baby makes three.
If all you want is a child born, but not a child fed, not a child educated, not a child housed, and why would I think that you don't? Because you don't want any tax money to go there. That's not pro-life, that's pro-birth.
Freud's rejection of religious belief was not just a rejection of Judaism. It was a rejection of what he considered to be a belief in the supernatural, in magic and mysticism, which he regarded as something quite apart from being realistic.
Science asserts that there are no sources of knowledge of the universe other than carefully scrutinized observations. In other words, what we call research. And alongside it, no knowledge derived from revelation, intuition, or inspiration.
Once Freud defines his worldview, he writes that the doctrine that the universe was created by a being resembling a man, but magnified in every respect, a kind of Superman, reflects the gross ignorance of primitive peoples. His main argument rests on the notion that religious ideas are rooted in deep-seated wishes and are therefore illusions, false beliefs. According to Freud, God does not make us in his image. We make God in our image.
We need a much broader conversation on what the morality of pro-life is.
This seems to me to be the dilemma of American democracy today and of American religion, that there are dogmatists who do not want to admit that the other side might have some claim to credibility.
Dogmatism will always get you there. Ask a Catholic. We've been there. We do it well. It was dogmatism that split us in the first place in the 16th century. It's dogmatism, this whole notion that there is a truth that is the eternal truth and the unquestionable truth, means that whatever the Holy Spirit, whatever the impulses of a creating God goes on creating, we have to close our mind to those. We learned at the end of a telescope that it got us nowhere.
What came before the Big Bang?
Well, you'll never walk alone if you take somebody with you. Make that someone physical, otherwise it's all in your head. Which reminds me, it's over. It's All in Your Head is over for another week. Part 6, wasn't it exciting? Oh, it could have been better. In 2 weeks it will be. Yes, Over the Edge won't be here for 2 weeks, but when we come back the second Thursday in, what'll it be, December, Christmas month, it will be part 7 of It's All in Your Head. And we're going all the way to Jesus' birthday.